Erev Tov, good evening, everyone. Welcome back to GroundWaves. Chag Sameach. I hope everyone enjoyed a meaningful Yom Kippur and an uplifting Rosh Hashanah. If during unusual times, I certainly hope that the Yamim Noraim, that the days of awe, held deep significance for all of you during these unusual days. So, several years ago, on the Shabbat of Parashat HaCharimot, Andy and I went to shul Shabbat morning at a very traditional egalitarian shul in New Jersey, where a few of our friends and several families from the local Schechter school, where our kids were then enrolled, and where many of my colleagues from JTS belong. Now, not being a member myself, our family was not members there, I expected no honors and hadn't really received any in the few times that we had been there before for services, so I was really delighted that Shabbat when the Gabbai, a friend of mine, asked if I would take the fourth Aliyah. And as the Torah reading progressed, I looked around at the people in the room and I thought about how much I had in common with the several rabbis and educators around me, but also how much I felt that Andy and I and our family kind of stuck out. No doubt the familiar, sometimes paranoia-laced ruminations that many LGBTQ folk who live in very straight world as we do in Bergen County might feel. And then I laughed to myself and I said, imagine if the aliyah that I've been given is the one which contains the verse prohibiting homosexuality. And my pulse quickened. I stopped smiling and I quickly flipped ahead in the pages of my Chumash to the fourth aliyah, and there it was, in black and white, the opening words of the portion that just a few minutes from then I would be called up to the Torah to bless. Do not lie with a male as one lies with a woman. It is an abomination. Now, refusing the aliyah was not a choice for me, neither practically nor spiritually. In the few minutes I had left before being called up to the Torah, I wondered if this were some kind of cruel joke being played on me. Okay, more paranoia. And how all these religious figures and community leaders and scholars would react to the image of me standing by the Torah as these words are chanted. Would they be offended? Would I be offended? Maybe they'd be proud. Maybe I would be really proud. My name was called with the harav before it, which always gives me pause because it's not a title I take for granted. It always overwhelms me when I hear it. And I stood up as tall as my 5-foot frame could reach, and I approached the Torah. I knew that I had to convey to those who were assembled that I knew what was being read, that I had wrestled with it, and that, quite frankly, I had been victorious, but not at the expense of my ongoing love for and loyalty to our sacred Torah. I chanted those blessings with confidence, and I grasped firmly the handles of the Atzei Chaim, the handles of the Torah scroll, and I tried my hardest to embody with pride the paradox of what we'll call tonight sacred betrayal. And no one said anything to me about it, and I'm sure the dissonance of those few minutes of my aliyah, though, was not lost on people. While I've done my fair share of teaching and speaking about the issue of inclusion in the Jewish community, nothing quite prepares you for a moment when you're called to bless the Torah over a passage that curses you. At the very least, I knew I'd get some teaching mileage out of the moment, like I am right now. Now, the Hasidic tradition teaches that before God, no wickedness may be brought. How then, it asks, does Satan bring before God the sins of humanity? And the answer given is that Satan brings only the holiness that's contained within sin, since sin contains the seed of repentance that turns transgression into a good deed. Now, this subversive teaching turns upside down all of our long-held conceptions about the notions of sin and transgression. And taking up that mantle, Rabbi Nilton Bonder, in a short but powerful book called Our Immoral Souls, a manifesto of spiritual disobedience, deepens the concept of sin as redemptive. Just as the Darwinian view of nature posits that the evolution of life often requires the destruction of or the aggressive assault upon another form of life, as in survival of the fittest, Rabbi Bonder argues that the evolution of our souls, of our religious spirits, often mandates a violation of the very tradition to which our souls are bound. That tradition and treason, he suggests, are two inseparable concepts. The Torah is full of unusual transgressions that take place right in the midst of reminders about fulfilling the law. Consider the numerous violations of social contracts within biblical families and the heresies committed against reigning belief systems. Avraham betrays his father, younger sons usurp older ones, brothers steal birthrights, sisters steal husbands, and that's just in the first half of the book of Breshit. Our history is full of betrayals on the road to redemption. In Rabbi Bonder's words, to transgress is to transcend. And our history would have no political, scientific, religious, cultural, or artistic martyrs if it were possible to transcend without jeopardizing the survival of the species. Or as he put it, there can be no tradition without betrayal, nor betrayal without tradition. The last decades of growing affirmation and celebration of gender and sexual diversity within our Jewish community represents this instinct towards sacred betrayal. Not betrayal in the sense of transgression in any sinful sense, but a sense of transgression in the form of pushing beyond what were the accepted boundaries of our tradition. And while communities have approached inclusion from different vantage points at different paces, each has embodied this dynamic within our tradition that has been baked into it since its inception. And so with deep humility, I submit that when I stood up those several years ago to take an aliyah to the Torah over a portion which seems to suggest that the Torah wanted absolutely nothing to do with me. My standing there with pride as a gay Jew, as a gay woman, as a gay rabbi, in obvious and public rejection of the sacred words on the parchment right before me, was nothing less than a show of love, a statement of pride, an act of sacred betrayal. It was a curse transformed into a blessing. The Yiddish poet Aaron Seitlin said it best in his poem that I love to quote whenever I have the opportunity to, and I think this is a perfect one. His poem titled, "If You Look at the Stars and Yawn." Praise me, says God, and I'll know that you love me. Curse me, says God, and I'll know that you love me. Praise me or curse me, and I'll know that you love me. Sing out my graces, says God. Raise your fist against me and revile, says God. Sing out graces or revile. Reviling is also a kind of praise, says God. But if you sit fenced off in your apathy, says God. If you sit entrenched in, I don't give a damn, says God. If you look at the stars and yawn, if you see suffering and you don't cry out, if you don't praise and you don't revile, then I created you in vain, says God. On that Shabbat morning, there were those who might have expected me to curse, but all I could do was chant a blessing. ושמחת בחגיך והיית אך שמח ושמחת בחגיך והיית אך שמח ושמחת בחגיך והיית אך שמח ושמחת בחגיך והיית אך שמח. I am so excited to introduce Idit Klein as our guest tonight on GroundWaves. Idit is, as I hope many of you have read, a national leader for social justice, having worked in that space for over 25 years, working for peace organizations and working for LGBTQ inclusion. Since 2001, Idit has led Keshet, the National Organization for LGBTQ Equality in Jewish Life, building it from an organization that had a local footprint with an annual budget of just over $40,000 to an organization with a national footprint, actually a North American footprint with an annual budget of over $3 million. Under her leadership, Keshet has expanded to support tens of thousands of rabbis and educators and organizations and institutions in their efforts to become more inclusive organizations and communities that convey the most noble of our values, of the dignity of every single human being. She has spearheaded the creation of leadership development programs and retreat programs for queer Jewish teens. Idit is a leader who exudes equal treasures of intellectual prowess and emotional intelligence. Idit understands that the work she does isn't only about advocacy and programming. For many, it's about life and death. I've known Idit and I've worked with her for many years, and each time I interact with her, I come away so moved and so impressed with her signature combination of strength and compassion. It is a huge honor to have Idit as our guest tonight. Brucha haba, Idit, welcome.
Thank you so much, Dini, and Yasher Kochech on that stunning drash and personal story that you shared.
Thank you, thank you. Idit, let's jump right in. Tell us a little bit more about Keshet. There are people who are with us tonight who may not be as familiar with the organization. Tell us the different ways in which Keshet engages with the work of LGBTQ inclusion in the Jewish community. Tell us a little bit about where there are still spaces in the Jewish world that need opening up or that need widening, sensitivities that need deepening. Sometimes liberal progressive Jews may mistakenly think that the challenge of LGBTQ inclusion has largely been solved. Is that the case? Is it not?
So leave it to a rabbi to say, here's the first question and to ask 5 questions in one. So I've been a professional gay Jew for 19 years, as you heard in my bio. And I would say that the changes that I have seen in Jewish life now, in really North American Jewish life, the changes towards full LGBTQ equality and inclusion in Jewish life have been nothing short of staggering. So much more widespread and deeper and systemic than I ever would have imagined. The way that Keshet works to advance LGBTQ equality in Jewish life is by working in 3 major areas. We work first with Jewish community leaders, both staff and lay leaders at all kinds of Jewish institutions, synagogues, youth movements, Jewish family and children's service organizations, federations, day schools, summer camps, et cetera, et cetera. And we work with leaders to give them the tools that they need to foster truly LGBTQ inclusive cultures, leaderships, and policies within their organizations. Secondly, we work to mobilize those Jewish communities to advocate for LGBTQ equality in the broader world. So it's about fostering LGBTQ equality within a Jewish community and then urging that community and giving that community the tools to use their power in the broader world to advocate for LGBTQ rights. And thirdly, we work directly with LGBTQ Jewish teens, giving them spaces where they can just breathe and be themselves and feel a sense of wholeness. And that, I would say, is our area of work that I hope we will retire the soonest. And I say that because while I'm moved greatly by that work, while it inspires me to see LGBTQ Jewish teens come together and talk about how extraordinary it feels to be in a space where they can be their full selves, it also deeply saddens me. And it saddens me because these are kids who need to leave the Jewish community, need to leave the rest of the Jewish community in order to have a space where they can be their full selves. So what kind of changes have we seen? When I started doing this work almost 20 years ago, every single time we were able to identify a rabbi who was willing to publicly stand with us was a triumph. This was before marriage equality. This was when not supporting marriage equality was the norm in Jewish life, which is almost hard to imagine because, again, things have changed in such a stunning way. But that was the reality then. In those days, there wasn't a single Jewish high school in the country with a gay-straight alliance, which today uses the more inclusive term gender and sexuality alliances. So there's been tremendous change. And at the same time, we still have a tremendous way to go. Dini talked about, you asked in your question about whether in liberal communities we see a sense, whether there's a self-perception in liberal communities that the problem has largely been solved. And I would say that that is definitely the case. One of our great challenges is what I describe as the self-satisfaction of the tolerant. In many Jewish, I would say in most Jewish communities in North America today, you're not going to encounter virulent homophobia or transphobia. Rather, what you will encounter will be a certain degree of tolerance, ranging from quite uncomfortable tolerance to a more easy tolerance. But regardless, as we all know, no one wants to simply be tolerated in the community that is their home. Tolerance isn't what any of us are aspiring for. One of my heroes, Stuart Milk, who is the nephew of Harvey Milk, the late gay activist, Zichrono Livracha. Stuart Milk likes to say, he says, when I go outside in the summertime, because I like to be outside, I tolerate the mosquitoes. Gay people are not mosquitoes. Gay people are the butterflies of the world. So we say at Keshet, we want every Jewish community to treat LGBTQ people like the butterflies that we are, not as mosquitoes to be tolerated. And one more piece that I'll share is that for years, when we would go to an institution, when we'd be contracted with an institution to do a training for their teachers at a Hebrew school or the staff of a Jewish Community Relations Council, we would be told, please just talk about the G and the L in LGBTQ, because we're not ready for transgender and bisexuality is confusing. I would say that as of a few years ago, that started to shift very dramatically, such that today, a little over half of the requests for training and consultation that we get are around gender identity issues. I would say that there's still a lot of confusion and discomfort around bisexuality. There hasn't been much progress there, but there is a growing awareness of the fact that trans and non-binary people are in our communities, and our communities need to be equipped to be homes for them.
Well, it's encouraging that many requests are coming in today for the kind of guidance that you can offer. So critical, knowing as we do the higher rates of depression, anxiety, and suicidal tendencies amongst that demographic. So as I was saying before, this is not just advocacy and creative programming. This is really a matter of life and death, which is maybe a good segue into my next question, Idit, about how the pandemic has affected the work of Keshet and the people and communities whose lives you're touching.
So, so you were saying a moment ago, it's great to hear that so many requests are coming in. So one way that the pandemic has affected our work is that requests for the kind of LGBTQ equality and inclusion training that I was just describing, those requests almost came to a standstill for the first few months. Between mid-March and the end of April, we had 37 trainings scheduled. And we immediately, when everyone started working from home, we immediately contacted each of those institutions and offered to do those trainings online. Only 2 institutions took us up on that offer. Now, to be clear and to be fair, probably about 7 or 8 of those institutions were JCCs that were in the process of furloughing their staffs and shutting down. Another 5 or 6 were day schools that were really struggling to completely reinvent themselves as online educational institutions. And the rest were facing the need to dramatically pivot in the way that we were, but weren't in quite the same state of emergency. And what we heard from them was, well, this work is really important to us, but right now we need to focus on our core work. And I would wager that in all of those cases, if you had asked those same people 2 months earlier, do you view a commitment to LGBTQ equality as part of your core work? The answer would be absolutely yes. And then, in this time of heightened stress and vulnerability and uncertainty, suddenly so many Jewish institutions and institutions in general in our society reverted to what my friend and colleague April Baskin describes as their factory settings. They reverted back to kind of the way they started out, the way they were accustomed to running, before they started asking critical questions, before they made some vital adjustments so as to be an apparatus that could better serve the needs of their community. So we stayed in conversation with all of these institutions, of course, and and gently asked questions, such as, what is your core work, and who's part of the we who's deciding what your core work is, and what kind of Jewish community do you want to be, when we get to the other side of this terrible time. So I'm glad to say that starting sometime in the summer, we did start to see an uptick in requests, but that was definitely one impact for us. The other significant impact is on our work with teens. We know that that LGBTQ people in general disproportionately experience a sense of isolation, and we know that is particularly acute among young people. And for many of our teens, as I was sharing before, the weekend retreats, the Shabbatonim that Keshet offers, really were their only spaces where they could, just breathe breathe fully and freely and unselfconsciously be themselves. And suddenly all of those in-person gatherings were taken away from them. So we had a lot of teens who were very much struggling as a result. But the silver lining is that as a result of the online programs that we started running for teens, we started reaching a lot of teens who will never be able to make it to a Shabbaton because their parents are so not supportive of their kids' identities. Some of these kids are out to their parents and are now sheltering at home in homes that are the opposite of shelters. And some of these kids aren't out to their parents. And so those are the kids who are taking their laptops into their bedroom closets, closing their doors, putting their earbuds in, and chatting on Zoom and listening because they don't want anyone in their family to hear them. And so, for some of those kids, it may be that the access to peer support and community connection that we're providing perhaps isn't a matter of life and death, but is certainly a matter of greatly enhancing their lives. And I'm very grateful.
Idit, how can communities like Sha'ar help in the ongoing work that you do in the Jewish world? And how can we help support some of those very fragile and vulnerable lives that you just described? When I think about this question, I'm also mindful of the fact that there's a fine line between advocating for the kind of Jewish community and Jewish world that we feel very comfortably advocating for, and acknowledging that not every Jewish community, as you just described, not every Jewish family, not every Jewish community shares our values and our moral commitments. So how do you walk that line between Klal Yisrael, the unity of our people, and the very definitive vision that you have and that I fully endorse and share of that Jewish world being one that recognizes the dignity of every single person who calls it home?
Yeah, I love that question. So one of our values at Keshet is about meeting people where they are, meeting communities where they are, and then pushing them, sometimes gently, sometimes a bit more forcefully. And I described how we certainly have done that in our conversations with our community partners who were putting a hold on their work with us once the pandemic really hit. So in those processes of recognizing where people are and yet inviting them to take a step along the path to enter into a conversation, to enter into a process with us, it means that we're recognizing the diversity of values and political perspectives that exist. We're staying clear about our own vision of the Jewish world as we think it should be. And we're walking towards that, and we're extending an invitation to people to join us. In terms of Shar, I very much see you doing this already, but I would say, it's so important for Jewish communities to see other Jewish communities that are modeling the centering of stories and voices that historically have been marginalized in Jewish life. It's so important for others to see communities that relate to learning about all identity and justice issues, not as a linear process with an endpoint, but as an ongoing journey. There are so many liberal and progressive Jewish communities that would never think to invite someone like me to speak because their attitude is, oh, everybody knows all of that already. Not that inviting me to speak makes you a model, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So I think really kind of modeling the commitment to ongoing learning and the sense that there's always further to go. At Keshet, we're doing internal work around racial justice and equity work, and very much view that as an ongoing journey and an ongoing process that we don't know if and when that will end. And so I think for communities like Shar to do similar.
Let's pick up that thread for a minute. How does the current social and political climate of racial injustice and the assaults on democracy and civil rights and the basic degradation of civil discourse. How does all that play into the work that you're doing? Has it expanded your agenda? Has it focused it?
Yes and yes. I mean, it's definitely heightened the sense of urgency and relevance of our work. It magnifies attention to our work, increases interest. I think that a big part of why we saw an uptick in requests for training and consultation in June, was because of the racial protests in the wake of George Floyd's murder, and Jewish communities' general increased awareness of the need for diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And so we kind of rode that wave. But I would say really that we've seen heightened interest and a heightened sense of urgency since the 2016 election. Very soon after the 2016 election, there was a sense, certainly among among LGBTQ Jews and our closest allies, but rippling beyond our innermost circle too, a sense that so many of our hard-won rights were about to be in jeopardy. And as we've seen, indeed, so many of them have been imperiled, and so there's been a sense that that we need to fight not just to advance equality, but to fight for the equal rights that we've already won. Another really unfortunate consequence of this time of so much rancor in public discourse is the hardening of partisan lines. Within a month or two of the current president taking office, we started hearing from various Jewish educators and youth group leaders that they were told by their supervisors to remove the Keshet LGBTQ Jewish safe zone stickers that they had put on their classroom doors or clipboards or office doors. There are these 2x3 little stickers that say LGBTQ safe zone with a Magen David that Keshet produces. And they're very popular among particularly kind of educators and leaders as a way to show kind of, I'm a person who you can trust. I'm a place. This is a place where you can feel safe. And what they told us was that the message was very explicit. The message was, you need to take this down because this is partisan, or you need to take this down because this is going to upset our community members who are supporters of the president. So, it wasn't a sticker saying, we embrace and celebrate queer life. It was a sticker saying, this is a safe zone. This is a place where we want you to stay alive. And the message was, that is partisan, that is offensive, that needs to come down. And so the fact that we are living in a time in which that can happen has, really galvanized people. And we have seen an interest among rabbis and other Jewish community leaders and community members in general to take action for LGBTQ rights and to fight, at the very least, to maintain what we have.
That's a very disturbing story. Idit, let's take a step back for a moment and think about Jewish life in general. I wonder if you've encountered or you have come to think of systemic features of Jewish life, either in the realm of prayer or ritual or halakha, Jewish law, that you think need serious reimagining or revising in order to build the Jewish world that you are laboring to build. It's one thing to work with people and organizations and policies. Are there, I guess along the lines of the story that I told earlier, in the way that different communities have wrestled with text in that context, are there other features of our very tradition that we need to be thinking about differently?
Something that I think about a lot is the need to radically open up and create a sense of ownership of really every facet of Jewish tradition. I feel like I encounter so many Jews, of every sexual orientation and gender identity, who just feel like Jewish tradition, whether it be practice or prayer or study, it isn't available to them, that it's not something that they are entitled to, that I feel like there's this massive disenfranchisement when it comes to Jewish tradition. And we need to remember that our intellectual and spiritual tradition, is one in which every community member participates, and it's one of ongoing interpretation and ongoing engagement. Each one of us was at Sinai. Each of us has been a part of this story from the very beginning, and yet somehow that story has, the pages of that book have become metaphorically closed for so many members of our community. I feel very grateful that the first day when I saw a page of Chumash, a page of Torah text, when I entered a Jewish day school in third grade, my Orthodox Rabbi Yechiel Dubovik, pointed at the page and he said to me, "Here's the main story." And then he pointed to the left side of the page. He said, "And here is what someone has to say about that story." And then he pointed to the bottom. He said, "And here's what someone else has to say about that story." And sometimes they disagree with each other. And sometimes I disagree with them. Sometimes you may disagree with them, or you may disagree with me, but I always want to know what you think. And I'll never forget that. I mean, I'm 40 years older today, and I still so vividly remember just that unlocked for me, the keys to feeling like this tradition is mine, and I want every Jew to have that.
That's a beautiful and compelling answer. And as you were speaking, I was remembering the many, many Keshet events that Andy and I have attended where, in a way, Keshet manages to bring a page of, whether it's Chumash with commentary or a page of Talmud, to life. When you look around the room at a Keshet event, you see the different voices and faces of the Jewish community in that space. And your work has managed to transcend some of that partisanship. Idit, you have, in your inimitable way, you and your team have managed to create that multivocal, multi-presence community in what you do. And I think that speaks to the deeper truth that's at the heart of Keshet's mission, that when you really engage with it, is very hard to walk away from, is almost impossible to turn your back on. That core truth of the dignity of each and every single human being, and of Judaism being a home to all who wish to call it home. And along with that, as you just said so eloquently, comes access and ownership of all the treasures that we find inside. So
and I think, sorry, yeah, no, and I think that's really why we've been able to make so many connections and been able to engage so many communities in this process of change, because really what we're doing is saying, we share values, we share a commitment. We're inviting you to manifest that in your community.
Yeah.
Come walk with us.
Idit, in the last minute that we have, aside from your third grade rabbi, who sounds like a very wise and compassionate man, are there others who have been, those who have inspired you in the work that you've done? Who are some of your heroes?
I could talk about historical figures, but I've been thinking lately about the fact that it is the oldest person in my life whom I love and the youngest person in my life whom I love deeply, who lately have been most inspiring me. So I will talk about them. So the oldest is my 98-year-old grandmother, my Savta Margot, who lives in Israel and is an Auschwitz survivor and endured what was designed to destroy her, and yet has always had a positive outlook on life and always been hopeful, and always kept her sense of humor. And so, there have been days during the pandemic when when I've called her and she makes me feel better about my life, which is ridiculous. But so she's one person who helps ground me and inspire me about the kind of hope that is possible to hold on to. And the other person is my 5-year-old son, Lior, who listens to my wife and I talk about politics and absorbs probably more than he should. And he's very much aware of, as he describes it, that there are some light-skinned people who treat people with dark skin unfairly. And he talks a lot, he asks a lot of questions about racial justice matters. And there are two signs in the world that he can sight read. He can sight read stop on stop signs, and he can sight read Black Lives Matter. And I find it both heartbreaking and deeply heartening that that's the case. It's heartbreaking for me that that is a sign that needs to proliferate in our public spaces, that that's a sign that conveys a message that still needs to be seen and heard. And it's deeply heartening to me that that is a message that is core to his understanding of what it means to be a person in the world.
Idit, thank you so much for spending this time with us. And those are two beautiful images to leave us with, your Savta and your son. And I just want to thank you for your courage and for your wisdom and for your relentless efforts to build a world of love, and know that we stand with you and really applaud you and are ready to lift up in any way that we can the work that you're doing. And I just feel safer in the world because of you and because of Keshet, and I know that our children and our grandchildren will as well. So thank you, and wish you lots of strength and immense fulfillment from what you do.
Thank you so much, Jeannie. It's wonderful to be together, and thank you for being my partner in this work.
Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
Done. So beautiful, Dan.
Thank you.
You know, it's no coincidence that we're talking about diversity and equity and inclusion during the festival of Sukkot. There are so many allusions to the religious responsibility of creating inclusive communities that emerge from the symbols and the teachings of this festival, and many of them are well known. Like the Sukkah itself symbolizes the importance of building our homes and communities into spaces that are welcoming, into spaces that respect all whom we invite in. The halachic requirements of the Sukkah convey this value in the Talmudic understanding that the verse in Vayikra commanding that we sit in the Sukkah, B'Sukkot teishvu shiv'at yamim, kol ha'ezrach b'Yisrael yishvu b'Sukkot, you shall live in booths 7 days, all citizens of Israel shall live in booths. The Talmud understands that this verse is stated in the singular, kol ha'ezrach, each individual Jew, in order to teach us that every single sukkah has to be big enough to accommodate every single individual, implying that a sukkah that is not inclusive of all of us is not a sukkah fit for any of us. There are limits to the height that a sukkah can be built with, but no limits to its breadth, signifying that we have to make it big enough to hold everyone. The tradition of ushpizin, of inviting sacred guests into our sukkah, even the fragility of the sukkah that reminds us to recall not just the historical vulnerable shelters that our ancestors dwelt in when wandering in the desert, but also the very real fragile shelters that many within our community and many with whom we share our country and our planet have to dwell in every single day. The fragile, often unreliable shelters of respect and acceptance and dignity that are not ritual symbols but are the reality of their lives. Our Sukkot are meant to teach us radical empathy and compassion. But here's another interesting, perhaps lesser known insight from the festival of Sukkot that elevates this mitzvah of creating inclusive communities. The Rebbe reminds us that our sages in the Midrash Vayikra Rabbah teach that the etrog and the lulav and the hadassim, the myrtle, and the aravot, the willow, that are used during the holiday of Sukkot to fulfill the mitzvah of taking the 4 species are each symbolic of a different category or a different kind of Jew, and so that they together are symbols of unity or inclusion. But the Rebbe raises an important question. Each of the 4 species is ranked for their reflection of taste and fragrance, metaphors for the study of Torah and the performance of mitzvot. Highest among them is the etrog, which possesses both taste and fragrance. The lulav, by comparison, the palm branch with dates, is represented by having taste only or study only. The myrtle has only fragrance, and the willow has neither. So the Rebbe asks, if the etrog is the epitome of these qualities, possessing both of them, why do we make the blessing over these ritual items al netilat lulav? Now, some say that the reason is because the lulav is the tallest of these species, and the physical shape of something reflects the spirituality with which it is imbued, suggesting that because of its height, the lulav has a higher, loftier spiritual significance compared to the etrog or the hadassim or the aravot. But it's hard to understand how that's so, if, as we said before, the etrog possesses both the qualities of taste and fragrance, of study and action, and the lulav has only one. Now, the Rebbe goes off into his own explanation of the primacy of Torah study, represented by the lulav, over all else, not unlike the sages in the Talmud who concluded that study is more important than the performance of mitzvot, than sacred action, because study leads to action. But I want to suggest another reason why, in spite of the fact that the lulav has only one of these qualities, it is the lulav that we bless when we hold them, all these species together. Remember the famous midrash that compares each of the 4 species to different parts of our bodies. The etrog to the heart, the hadassim or the myrtle to the eyes, the aravot, the willow to the lips, and the spine of the lulav is compared to the human spine. The spine, the back, is the central focus of disciplines that focus on the mind-body or the soul-body connection. Judith Harris wrote a book called Jung and Yoga, The Psyche-Body Connection, in which she talks about, in her words, the potential to experience life as resting in the spinal column, itself the backbone of life. The spine is the first structure that's formed inside the womb, and from it, everything, the body, the limbs, begin to take root, so that the spine really is the central support of all that we are. In yoga, the spine is seen as the center of our sacred anatomy, considered the microcosm of the axis mundi, the pillar that supports the world, the pillar that connects heaven and earth, so that the sacrum, the base of the spine, is often called the sacred bone. The ability to stand tall, as I alluded to in my opening story about getting up to take that aliyah as tall as my 5'4" frame then could have me reach. The ability to stand tall is seen as a posture of pride, a posture of groundedness, a posture of dignity and confidence and self-esteem. It's a posture that we not only seek for ourselves, but it's one that our tradition charges us to enable all others to embody. Now, while you can fulfill the mitzvah of sitting in the sukkah by sitting in somebody else's sukkah, you cannot borrow a lulav and etrog set to fulfill the mitzvah of holding them together on the first day of the holiday. You have to be in possession of your own. Again, teaching us that to stand and walk through this world with pride and dignity is not anything that you can do on the back of anyone else, and it's not anything that we can extend to someone else from within ourselves. We are charged to build a world where every single human being is in possession of their own lulav, their own spine, their own pride and dignity and self-esteem. That is the essence of Torah. And that is why the lulav is blessed when we hold these species together, even though it may have fewer attributes than the etrog. Its singular trait of upright presence is the core expression of humanity that they all together represent. And the unity that they together exude can only have integrity if it's based on the ability for each and every one of us to stand straight, to be held by our spines, and to be surrounded by our own dignity and our own pride. Beautiful. I want to share some announcements before we conclude with our tefillah, with our prayer. Wednesday night will feature in our Sha'ar Wednesday night Beit Midrash the last of 3 sessions that we've devoted to creating space to discuss some of the issues that have been raised by the pandemic. 2 weeks ago, we discussed the issue of mortality. Last week, we engaged in some values clarification. And this week, during Chol HaMoed Sukkot, we'll look at the way the pandemic has affected our faith in God. The title for the session, Ushpizin, is God on the guest list. I invite you, please, to take a closer look at the email that went out yesterday, or also the email that will go out Wednesday morning for a number of very interesting readings that will inform the both large and smaller conversations that we'll have together Wednesday night. This coming Shabbat morning, I want to invite you all to please join Sha'ar and 5 other communities across the country for an unprecedented opportunity for collaborative tefillah. This is an initiative led by Sha'ar, bringing together all of these congregations on Shabbat, Shmini Atzeret, to mark the launch of Countdown 2020, a global initiative to raise awareness and commitment to the importance of climate activism. Our Shabbat Yom Tov service will include all of the highlights of the traditional service on that day, including Kohelet and Yizkor, the memorial prayers, Tfilat Geshem, Hallel. Each segment of the service will be led by a different partner, different congregational partner. We'll be joined by Mishkan in Chicago, also the Ethiopian Hebrew congregation in Chicago, by Dayenu, the new organization launched by Rabbi Jenny Rosen, all about creating a Jewish climate movement, by Ariel Lekach Rosenberg, together with her congregation in Minneapolis, Shir Tikva, as well as Jessica Kate Meyer and the community from the Kitchen in San Francisco, and Reb Ezra Weinberg as well from New York. Please spread the word and join us for this highly, highly unusual and unique opportunity to come together in tefillah in support of our beloved but imperiled planet. Next Monday, our guest on GroundWaves, you're not going to believe this. We have, as our guest, Dan Nadel. We are going to be engaging in some conversation with Dan in addition to his extraordinary music. You think you may know him, but I'm sure there's lots about Dan that many of us are eager to learn more about. So Dan, we are really honored to be hosting you as our guest next Monday night on GroundWaves. The following Wednesday night will be the launch of Sha'ar's Justice Beit Midrash. The upcoming election is, of course, raising all kinds of questions about the nature of justice and leadership and democracy in our country, and its aftermath will have us, I'm sure, wrestling with many, many more questions. How do we as Jews and as a Jewish community locate ourselves within the discourse of the political situation today and the attendant civic responsibilities? We'll look at such questions as how we have succumbed to a world that we look at through a partisan political lens instead of our moral lens, how we respond to authoritarian elements in American and Jewish society, under what circumstances civil disobedience may be appropriate, how we pursue racial justice in the face of anti-Semitism that often raises its ugly head within elements of some of the communities that we seek to build partnerships with. More broadly, we'll examine the question of the nature of justice, how we define justice, where our notions and commitments to justice come from, the connection between justice as a value and justice as action, and how we ought to be prioritizing our time and our efforts when it comes to social justice work. Every Wednesday night, we're going to be poring over texts and teachings. I'll be framing with my own teachings, and we will wrestle with such issues as civic responsibility, democracy, leadership, race, immigration, healthcare, income inequality, climate, and so much more. And each unit will be capped by a visit from an activist or an advocate organization in order to help us build the bridges between learning and doing and to catalyze the transformational impact of our study. Please be sure to look for the emails in which you'll find registration links. We invite everyone to join us for this urgent and compelling series. Watch out also Sunday, October 18th, the first of our Armchair Pilgrim Supper Club programs with Rav Chaim Ovadia. We're heading to Baghdad on the 18th of October. Watch for recipes and ingredients for cocktails. You guessed it. And after we finish GroundWaves tonight, stick around if you like for a few minutes of the opportunity just to say hello in some smaller groups and wish each other a Chag Sameach. Done. Closing tonight with a prayer from Sidur Sha'ar Zahav, which is the LGBTQ synagogue in San Francisco. This is a prayer titled Contemplation on Sitting in the Sukkah. If I just had a little hut to sleep inside of for just one night, out of the wind, out of worrying about the rain, I would be so grateful. So grateful that I would offer the fruits of my harvest, if I had a harvest, or if I had fruits. But since I don't, I would offer God what I could instead. A prayer of thanks or maybe a song, if there were one within me. Would offer my heart to be opened anyhow, even if I couldn't pray or sing. And if I had a piece of fruit to eat from your sukkah, I would remember better how Avraham welcomed strangers into his tent. And then I would eat half my hanging grapes and save the rest for my friend, who was still searching for a hut in which to be welcomed. And then I would be able to tell her about Hapores Sukkot Shlomecha al Kol Amo Yisrael, about the one who spreads the shelter of their peace over all people Israel. And I'll just add, be able to tell her about our commitment to spread that shelter of peace and of love over all throughout the world. ושמחת בחגיך והיית שמח ושמחת בחגיך והיית שמח. Laila Tov, everyone.